Hello and welcome Internet to yet another episode of Warhammer Lore with me, GreyHunter, where this time around we're going to be looking at the vile Ratmen, the Skaven. Yes, yes. So the Skaven in the Warhammer world are probably the one race that the others will never actually admit exists, even though some of them definitely know that they do. These oversized Ratmen are seen as mythical creatures by the general population, which is rather hilarious when you think about it in context. I mean, overly violent psychopathic vampires, totally real. Ogres that eat people when they're so inclined. Yeah, sure, whatever. Mutated rats that are about the size of a man and, can do science. Nah, totally off your rocker, mate. But that's part of what makes them interesting. They're just that different. They're fairly technologically advanced, as I mentioned. They're about on par with the Empire in terms of weaponry. They've even got a kind of laser cannon with their the warp-fire cannons that they use. Interestingly enough as well, they're probably closest to a pure evil faction that the setting has, given that pretty much everything they do is self-serving in some way, and they obsessively-compulsively backstab each other continually for position. I mean, even the followers of Chaos, whack jobs to a man that they are, have some redeeming qualities. And so, in honor of that, the Skaven, for this episode, are getting a special jingle that goes something like this. For Skaven, treachery is a way of life. Nothing is more natural than death and strife. If you see a chance to put yourself ahead, you better take it now, 'cause tomorrow you'll be dead. Origins. This time around, the origins section is going to be a little bit different, seeing as nobody really knows exactly what created the Skaven, though Tzeentch is often pointed out as the culprit. It's noted in various army books that some scholars of the Warhammer world think that perhaps they're an offshoot of the Beastmen, which has the benefit of kinda being likely, and in older editions was actually what they were. They were basically a more sane version of the Beastmen, but that's been changed now. They're not. We don't talk about those times. There's a poem included in the latest version of the Skaven army book where men and dwarves set up a city above and below ground respectively, and for their prosperity, because the land is wonderful and great, the men decide that they're going to build a temple to give praise to the gods, as you do. The temple takes generations to build, and they're still not finished with the tower that's going to go on top of it when a stranger in grey shows up, offering to finish the temple in a single night. Sure, say the men, that sounds like a great deal. And true to his word, the stranger does indeed raise the tower, but on top of it is a great horned bell, because that totally doesn't sound like foreshadowing. Rejoicing, the men in the town hang out in front of the temple at midnight, like the stranger told them to, and the bell tolls. But it tolls 13 times. This is pretty important, because 13 is a holy number to the Skaven. You'll find out why in a few minutes. What seems to be an acidic rain starts falling, and it's heavily implied to be warpstone, and the doom of the city is at hand. Rats start swarming and murderizing all of the people, so they're not exactly having a good time. In their desperation, they even pray to the old demon princes of Chaos, but they're boned beyond even the Chaos gods wanting to tangle with the things attacking them. Or Tzeentch decided it was funny to watch them suffer, Take your pick. They ask the dwarves for help twice, and they get told to sod off, so the third time, they decide, nope, we're not asking, and they just break down the gates. Unfortunately, they do that, and all the dwarves are dead. So the humans die in a last stand against an overwhelming horde of vermin. The Ratmen had taken over. So given that the Skaven capital is a place called Skavenblight that they're supposed to have captured, and the temple does sound exactly like the one erected to the Great Horned Rat, this poem sounds like it's probably on the money. And so to history. So according to the Skaven army books, because nobody apart from them has ever really bothered to record Skaven history, and even then they don't really bother all that much, the fall of Kavzar, which is the city that was referred to in the poem, happened around 1600 years before Sigmar was born. They take over the city, they rename it Skavenblight, and they proceed to procreate their little rat asses off. In the depths of the city, the first experiments on what eventually becomes the race-wide version of crack addiction, warpstone, happens as the Greyseers, who are pretty much wizards, try to harness it, and they manage, as is usual with Skaven engineering, to fail spectacularly. The city more or less explodes and collapses, except for the great temple to the Horned Rat. Some Skaven manage to dig themselves out of the rubble, and they arrive at the temple, not sure what to do, because they're pretty scared of everything, when 12 figures approach out of the doors. These 12, clad in grey, tell the surviving Skaven that the Horned Rat told them it is their destiny to spread underground across the world and to procreate like they'd never procreated before, in preparation for the day they take over in world domination. These 12 name themselves the Lords of Decay, and they divide the surviving Skaven into 12 groups, one for each of them. Excavating downward, they find that the experiments weren't a complete failure. The warpstone explosions had ripped open new tunnels, and it was these that the Skaven set off through. This led to the early conflicts with the dwarves just as they were going through their own time of woe, and were at their weakest, so bad news. After about 100 years, the first Skaven scouts come across a place called Cripple Peak, which is a fairly significant place in Warhammer history, for various reasons. First off, it's a place filled to the gills with warpstone. Unfortunately for the Skaven, it was already occupied by Nagash. Yeah, that guy again. The necromancer who brought down Nehekara with his magics. The Skaven, already having that racial crack addiction, attacked him, each clan having a go individually, but naturally it didn't work, and the Council of 13, a new ruling council formed by the surviving members of the original 12 Lords of Decay, and anyone vicious enough to have taken control of one of the 12 clans, plus a 13th seat that was kept empty symbolically for the Horned Rat itself, so that's where the whole veneration of 13 comes from. The council decreed that instead all Skaven should attack together. This didn't mean they'd share the spoils, but attacking alone obviously wasn't going to work. So they managed to burst into Nagash's lair, but necromancy is a pretty potent thing after all, and Nagash is able to just, keep raising the dead again and again and again and again and again. So they fight each other to a standstill. After about 100 years, they finally figure out it's going nowhere, and Nagash offers them a truce. He will supply them with some warpstone if they just stop hanging around his fortress and let him get on with the plans for world domination, damn it. The Skaven agree, but as always, they, had a cunning plan. Remember that jingle? For Skaven, treachery is a way of life. Nothing is more natural than death and strife. If you see a chance to put yourself ahead, you better take it now, 'cause tomorrow you'll be dead. So for a while, the Skaven just observe Nagash. They're trying to figure out what exactly it is that he's up to. Some of Nagash's undead armies set off in ships of bone, and they return with a human prisoner. The Grey Seers, Skaven wizards that you'll remember, start having visions of doom and destruction, and the magical storm clouds start gathering over the fortress of Nagash. Undead armies rise from the soil, and the memories of the 100 years of war that led to absolutely nothing, the Skaven are panicked by. Scared enough to agree to work together for once, the Council of 13 decides to use the human prisoner in the fortress, who's actually the King Alcadizar, to kill Nagash. Forging a sword from the warpstone of the mountain, they give it to him, and he manages to actually hurt Nagash, kind of killing him, but kind of not, banishing his essence. One of the Skaven clans moves into the fortress and claims it for their own, but 300 years later, Nagash returns and slaughters the clan, reclaiming his fortress. A second war against him breaks out, but with most of the warpstone in the mountain gone, they decide to just leave the crazy old necromancer to his, crazy old things. Meanwhile, in the lands of the West in Lustria, Clan Pestilence, which is a clan that will become one of the most powerful in Skaven history, takes over one of the fallen lizardmen cities and launches a war against them to find victims to sacrifice to the Horned Rat. They manage to hold off the lizardmen armies and to prosper as much as, it can be considered prosperity to be lords of a plague city. Deciding it was their time to return to the old world, the clan sends emissaries to the Council of 13, demanding tribute and concessions. It didn't go well with the council, and they butchered the emissaries for their insulting temerity. This started the Skaven Civil War, which was not the first civil war. There's always been infighting, but this is the first big civil war. And the sides are drawn between the Plague Lords of Pestilence and those clans loyal to the council. 400 years this war rages, nobody really having all that much success, and the conflict being locked in a stalemate. Eventually, another clan that was thought lost returns, Clan Eshin, the Assassins, and they begin to kill the Plague Lords and their followers. The Plague Lords call for a ceasefire, and the Lord Nurglich, that's an interesting name, innit? Chief of Pestilence, heads to Skavenblight. He offers to swear fealty for recognition by the council as an equal, and then he tells them that he's got a vial of the most virulent poison ever, and he'll release it right there in Skavenblight. The council welcomes them back into the fold, and Pestilence takes a seat on the council. Again, that jingle. For Skaven, treachery is a way of life. Nothing is more natural than death and strife. If you see a chance to put yourself ahead, you better take it now, 'cause tomorrow you'll be dead. 1111 years after Sigmar created the Empire, the Black Plague was released by Clan Pestilence, and the Empire was ravaged by it. Starting an actual invasion of the Empire, the Skaven sacked cities and took captives, but Middenheim, the city of the Rock, held out. Count Mandred held the city and rallied the remaining counts to his banner, fighting the Skaven back and being crowned emperor. This guy was so badass that he killed a Skaven warlord and decided, you know what, I'm going to wear his skull on my helmet. Mandred's Skaven Slayer was serious business. So serious that when he managed to fix a lot of the problems that the invasion of the Skaven had caused, they killed him with an assassin, because Skaven loved their treachery and backstabbing. The Skaven dick around a bit for now, manipulating the Arabian Sultan and the crusade against him, fighting the dwarves, stirring up the orcs and goblins and other such things, having fun. Skaven stuff, before releasing the Red Pox, or the Black Plague Round 2, on Bretonnia. It doesn't go so well this time around, mainly because the Wood Elves come to help the men, and the Duke of the province they pick to infect decides, you know what, I'm going to set that infected bit of the town on fire. Pestilence is blamed naturally, and the Council of 13 tries to have them thrown off the council. In response, they start another civil war. Say it together with me now. For Skaven, treachery is a way of life. Nothing is more natural than death and strife. If you see a chance to put yourself ahead, you better take it now, 'cause tomorrow you'll be dead. Clan Skariah, the engineer/wizard clan, takes control of Skavenblight and tries to put the council back together. But it's far too late, and another 400 years of civil war goes by. This time it's more of a three-faction thing, Pestilence, Skariah, and Mulder leading up the sides. And after 400 odd years again, The Grey Seers step in and decide to make a move to stop all this foolishness. At the time, Emperor Magnus is leading his armies against the Great Invasion of Chaos in the north, and the Grey Seers call every clan to Skaven Blight for the Feast of Vermintide in honor of the Great Horned Rat, on pain of the Great Horned Rat god's wrath. The clans show, and Seer Lord Kritislik holds his ceremony, killing 13 13s of slaves, and the Great Bell tolls 13 times, the Great Horned Rat ripping a hole in the fabric of reality and appearing to the gathered Skaven, placing, for one thing, a 13-sided pillar, and for another, telling them that while the fighting was indeed hilarious, they really should stop. After all, they have world domination to consider. The Council of 13 would be reformed, but only the Horned Rat's chosen would be allowed to be on it. They must touch the pillar it had placed, and survive to earn a council seat. The Skaven do stop fighting, and for the next 200 years or so they start making preparations and launching small-scale assaults on the other races. In the early 2500s, which is pretty much modern day for the Warhammer universe, they assassinate key players and set factions like the Empire and Bretonnia against one another. And now we come to the end times. The Skaven had done pretty well for themselves, all things considered. They finally launched that assault on the realms of men, overrunning Bretonnia, Estalia, Telea, and Araby is definitely on the ropes. Cathay, Nippon, and Ind are implied to have been swallowed up by the Vermintide, but they don't really count in terms of Warhammer factions. They struck out at their old enemies, taking several dwarf holds and killing major leaders, including the High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer. The implication here again is that the dwarves, like the lizardmen, have pretty much lost everything, and as a faction they might be finished. The Great Horned Rat, for reasons of its own, kills Kritalisk, and the Council of 13 took away the Seer's seat, so the usual plotting to grab the open slot is there, happening at full force. Vermin Lords, which are basically Skaven Chaos Daemons, show up, in greater and greater numbers, taking 4 forms, each corresponding to one of the Chaos Gods. Coincidence? I think not. The Grey Seers and Clan Scaraya both try to pull the moon of Warpstone closer because of their drug addiction, and they do succeed in that, though their joint efforts actually means that the thing explodes way closer to the world than planned, and causes a ton of destruction, which is only stopped from destroying the world by the sacrifice of Lord Krokan Mazdamundi. It's also implied in an article in the Games Workshop official hobby magazine, which, take it with a grain of salt, that the Skaven found a device, which is possibly a lizardmen one, that allowed them to move Skaven Blight to another dimension. Rats in space, maybe? They've also decided to ally themselves with the power of chaos, putting them firmly in the camp of evil, mainly out of fear of the reborn Nagash. I mean, he's kicked their asses twice after all. I think they've got a pretty good reason to be scared shitless of the guy. Demon. White. Whatever he is now. Special characters. First up on the list of special characters is Thanquol and Bone Ripper, a tag team of sorts. Thanquol is a Grey Seer who has spent his life, when not plotting against his fellow Skaven, trying to understand the manlings of the world. Even more coped up on Warpstone than his fellows, he's filled with energy, but his plots fail the majority of the time, though he always manages to shift the blame, and occasionally his mistakes have ended with happy coincidence, like when his plans at Nuln failed one time, wiping out a clan that was actually threatening the Council of 13, which he was quick to turn to his favour. He's pretty much a junkie with a fantastic string of lucky breaks. His partner Bone Ripper is a rat ogre that the council assigned him as a bodyguard. No matter how many times it dies, it's always rebuilt like a completely organic Robocop. In the end times, Thanquol finally does destroy Nuln, and helps the hordes of chaos take Mindenheim. He's basically set himself up to be a force to be reckoned with. All things considered, he's achieved all of his goals. He's even figured out how to hide his thoughts from Screech Vermin King, a guy that we'll get to in a few minutes. Naturally, he's plotting to betray him. Once more, with feeling. For Skaven, treachery is a way of life. Nothing is more natural than death and strife. If you see a chance to put yourself ahead, you better take it now, 'cause tomorrow you'll be dead. Queek Headtaker. A warlord of Clan Moors, he's pretty much the closest the Skaven come to a professional soldier. He's also my favourite Skaven special character. A warrior of great renown and skill, he's often assigned to break the line and lead the charge, and he's well known by the enemies of the Skaven. The Greenskins respect him, even orcs acknowledging his skill, and he appears a great many times in the Dwarven Book of Grudges. Armed with a magical mace that he found, Dwarf Gouger, he's a whirlwind on the battlefield, windmilling his way through enemies, slicing and dicing. His quirk, apart from being a Skaven that generally seems to be actually brave, is that, as his name suggests, he keeps the heads of his enemies, adorning his armor with them. In the end times, he leads the Skaven attacking Karazar Karak in an assault, killing his longtime enemy Dwarf King Belagar Ironhammer. Unfortunately for him, Thorgrim Grudgebearer is also there and avenges Ironhammer, snapping Queek's neck with his hand, just by choking him like a bitch. This causes a rout and the dwarves hold Karazar Karak. Ikit Claw. A warlock engineer of Clan Scaraya, like Darth Vader, he's now machine more than Skaven, twisted and evil. After an accident with his experiments, he created a powered exoskeleton crossed with armor. Basically, he had power armor before Space Marines did. He's traveled the world, stealing secrets and learning how to create more and more inventions. Returning from his travels during the Second Civil War, he's appointed as chief of the Scaraya factories in Skaven Blight, where he makes a ton of changes and pretty much becomes the Henry Ford of the Skaven. While on the tabletop he's basically just a token clan Scaraya named character, in the lore he's pretty interesting. In the end times he goes with Queek to assault Karazakarak, but he survives the failed assault, though his armor is now kind of fused to his body. Throt the Unclean. A master mutator of Clan Molder, these guys are basically the geneticists of the Skaven, by the way. He, like Ikit Claw, is twisted and evil. Mutated by his own experiments upon himself and consumed by a need to feed, he serves as kind of a beast hunter for Clan Molder, and leads rat ogres into battle with great ferocity. He's again pretty much just a character that exists to give one of the major clans a special character representative. He's so token that in the end times I could only find an offhand mention that he sometimes hangs out with Ikit Claw. Squeal Gnawtooth, aren't you just loving how these guys are so puntastic like the lizard men? Pretty much another side to Throt. He's got a cool name, but basically he's just a good slave overseer. He was the runt of the litter when he was born, but he clawed his way to survival and recognition when the clan leaders made him a packmaster like Throt, the Unclean. This guy is such a nobody, though, that he didn't even get a mention, not even offhand, in the end time. Lord Skrolk, a plague lord of Clan Pestilence that has lived for centuries upon centuries, and everything he touches seems to die. Blinded by clawing his own eyes out when he looked upon the arch-plague lord Nurglich, he's a formidable warrior fighting on the battlefield still, despite not being able to see with eyes. He's implied to be able to see through some kind of magical sight provided by the Great Horned Rat, though. Death walking, he's, well, as I said, the Clan Pestilence addition to the array of special characters usually included for the purpose of representing the clan, though at least he's kind of useful. In the end times, he duels with Krokgar, killing the Carnosaur Grimlock before Krokgar kills him in return. He's not dead for realsies, though. Krokgar thinks he is, but a vermin lord brings him back to life. Even in death, he can still serve. Tretch Craventail. A commando if the Skaven had commandos. He comes to prominence basically by being a shifty little bastard. So, like all Skaven. Giving some night goblin captives some alcohol that drives them absolutely nuts, fungus beer I believe it's called, he killed off the entire chain of command for his group, taking over. Now he serves as a master scout and a covert operative, frequently being sent on what are assumed to be suicide missions, usually on purpose, but he always manages to survive through cunning and guile. The army book recounts him taking out a rival of his by hiding as a stalactite and dropping onto the guy, slicing him in two. Pretty cool as far as lore goes, but mediocre in the actual game itself, unfortunately. Once again, he did not appear in the end times as far as I could tell, but that might be left for the last book. Deathmaster Snitch. Yes. Master Assassin of the Clan Eshin. He's the last of the included to give the major clans a representative lot. He's a bit like 47 if 47 were a rat. He strikes from the shadows and leaves no evidence of his passing. He once killed a wizard in a sealed observatory, and he killed a dwarf lord in the middle of a fortress, though this time he took the head. Wielding magic weapons and clad in a magical cloak, he's an assassin that has no equal. In the end times, he avenges Queek Headtaker, killing Thorgrim Grudgebearer in the middle of Karazakarak, taking the dwarf High King's head as a trophy. Yeah, the whole thing. And the final on the list of the special characters, Screech Vermin King, a newer character that appears for the end times, and not a single person per se. Screech Vermin King is the entirety of the Council of 13 that took down Nagash. The Horned Rat wasn't really pleased by their shenanigans, so he trapped them in a pocket dimension. But then, afterwards, seeing that the following councils couldn't even come close to the success this one had, he had a little bit of mercy and said, alright, you can come back out. Unfortunately, when he did that, he discovered that they'd all merged into a single entity, though they all retained separate identities. The Horned Rat figured, you know what, I could probably use this, and forged them into the first Vermin Lord, Screech Vermin King. Master Wizard, Master Combatant, and all-round goddamn terrifying, the Vermin King is pretty much the living avatar of the Horned Rat. Pretty much a Skaven demon prince, he comes out to help Thanquol take Nuln in the end times, and sets it up so that Thanquol will end up with a seat on the Council of 13, provided everything goes just as planned, despite the Greyseers losing their seat. So there you have it, the Skaven lore in a nutshell. They look to be one of the factions that will survive, all in all. If they get included in a Total War game, which they pretty much have to be, considering that 1, the fandom loves them, 2, they've survived, which is a pretty big prerequisite, and 3, that they actually have a purpose, they will be the biggest horde army that ever did horde, even including the beastmen and the orcs and goblins. Still more of a horde army. Overall, they're an interesting faction, though I think the loss of Queek Headtaker is quite sad, because, you know, he was an interesting character. I liked him a lot. It'll be interesting to see how they deal with, if they put them into the game, the concept of an underground empire, because will you be able to fight underground? Or will you just have to go to very specific places to attack their cities and such? But they might just make the Skaven an above-ground faction, which would be really disappointing. But then again, CA are foolish manlings. It's a thing that they might do. Which is unfortunate, because the Skaven under-empire is kind of their thing. All roads lead to Skaven Blight, damn it. If it were up to me, I would try to make it so that, you know, if there was the ability to have an underground empire, it would totally be happening. I'd even put the game on hold to make sure you could, you know, be faithful to the universe. But unfortunately, I don't work for a games company. And even if I did work for a games company, I'd probably be told, hey, we have to make money, damn it. And so with that, we're at the conclusion of another Warhammer lore video. So I shall see you guys in the next one, which I have already planned up. It's going to be the Dogs of War, and I hope you will enjoy it. It's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be the Dogs of War plus the smaller factions of man, which you guys were asking for. So on that note, I will see you in the next video. GreyHunter signing out.